Okay, well certainly the mathematics behind Hold'em are extremely important. You know, understanding pot odds, starting position, and all the other aspects of the game. But realistically, what it all boils down to is the way you read your opponents. What we're going to look at now are some of the various opponents you're going to face in the game. Playing against amateurs is where you're going to make the brunt of your money. I mean, these guys don't know what they're doing. They're playing all sorts of hands they shouldn't be playing, calling all kinds of bets they definitely shouldn't be calling. So the thing to think about when playing these amateurs is, because they're calling stations, you don't want to bluff them. If you start bluffing amateurs, then you become an amateur, really. Now the rocks just play super tight. When you're up against a rock, they're always in there with a premium hand. And whenever they bet at you, they pretty much always got the nuts. So how do you defend against that? It's pretty easy, really. If a rock ever bets at you, just throw your hand away. You want to avoid marginal situations. Also, when it's a rock that's in the blind, you should go ahead and raise it up. The guy's never going to play unless he has the absolute nuts. Rocks do really well against amateurs, and they do well against maniacs. But as a pro, you can exploit a rock really easily. Now when you're up against a maniac, you really have to have your seatbelt on. I mean, these guys are nuts. They're always betting, raising, re-raising, bluffing, with all kinds of weird hands. So the way to defend against that is you really got to set traps for them. Let them bluff their money off and milk them all the way to the river. Set traps, that's the key. The problem is, for a pro, maniacs can often be a thorn in your side. The maniacs do really poorly against the rocks, and they do poorly against the amateurs, but they can often take a pro down. When you're up against a pro, you better bring your A game. Pros aren't easily predictable. They mix up their game really well. Sometimes they're bluffing, sometimes they're playing the nuts. They're always constantly changing gears at will. So why bother pick on a pro when you have other opportunities to beat up on the weak players? Stick to beating up on the amateurs and the rocks. The only time you should face off against a pro is when you've got Poker's all about getting the best of it. It's about making correct decisions and good bets. Let's take this coin, for example. The odds of it hitting heads or tails are 50-50. What if I told you I put up $300 to your $100 that it comes heads? Well, that seems like a good bet for you. Conversely, if I said I'll put up $300 but you have to put up $1,000, well, that doesn't seem like such a good bet for you anymore. In poker, pot odds are the exact same principle as flipping this coin. When it comes to pot odds, the first thing you need to think about is what price the pot is laying you. Let's look at an easy example. Let's say there's 500 in the pot already, and your opponent's bet 100. Well, count that up. There's 600 there. How much do you have to call? 100. So what are the odds? 6 to 1. Now once you've figured out what price the pot is laying you, it's important to understand what the odds of you actually making your hand is. So let's look at an example. Let's say you had a flush draw and there's one card to come. Well, we know 6 cards, which leaves 44 remaining unseen cards. Well, there's 9 spades that could help you, meaning there's 9 good cards and 35 bad cards. So that right there is right around 4 to 1 odds. If the pot is laying you more than 4 to 1 odds, well then you're getting the right price. If the pot's only laying you, for example, 2 to 1 odds, if you ask world champion Carlos Mortensen, he'll probably tell you, poker is all about the bluffing. Well, while bluffing is definitely an integral part of your overall strategy, I mean, that's not all there is to it. First of all, you got to figure out, who do you bluff? Think about that for a second. How you can bluff an amateur? An amateur doesn't even know what he has, let alone he's going to try to figure out what you've got now. How about the maniac? You don't want to get involved with these guys. You trap maniacs. You don't try to bluff them. The guys you want to bluff are the rocks, the weak and the timid. There's more than one way to bluff. You can try a desperate, stone-cold bluff on the river when you've got absolutely no hand. Or you can use a trick that the pros like to use, called the semi-bluff. Think about it for a second. Let's say you have 2 hearts in your hand. 2 hearts come out on the board, giving you a flush draw. Well, that's a pretty strong hand. You're going to call a bet, right? Why not bet yourself? This gives you 2 ways to win. If you bet and nobody calls, you win the pot right there. If you bet and somebody does call, oh well, now it's just time to hit your flush and win an even bigger pot. I see far too many rookies throwing out that desperation bet on the river thinking that's the only way they can win. But that's not how you bluff. You gotta set up a bluff early in the hand. It's like telling a story. You don't just throw a bet out on the river with no rhyme or reason. If you're telling a lie, you gotta tell it right. You know why position is so important in Texas Hold'em? I'll tell you why. Bluffing. When you get to see what your opponents do before you have to act, you get so much more information that you can use against them. Think about it. Your opponent checks, he's either trapping you or he's got nothing. It's your job to figure out which one it is. This is no time to get cute. There's too many people in the pot to try bluffing wildly when there's so many people that could hit the flop. Yeah, when you're up against one guy, sure you can bluff, especially if he checks to you. But with 4 guys in a pot, come on, man. You can't bluff everybody. So why would you ever show a bluff? I'll tell you why. There's nothing sweeter than taking a pot off a guy with absolute rags and then showing it to him as he throws his hand in the muck. It'll send him on complete tilt for the rest of the session. And everybody else at the table, they'll get to see that you're willing to bluff, you might have the nuts, they'll never be able to figure you out. You know, it's funny. Sometimes the absolute correct strategy for no limit hold'em is the exact opposite of what the correct strategy would be in limit hold'em. Let's take a look at a few examples. Probably the biggest difference between no limit and limit hold'em is the way you approach playing on the flop. Now in limit hold'em, it's all about pound, pound, pound. Let's say for example, you have ace jack, and the flop comes jack 9-4. Well, in limit hold'em, you want to bet and raise and re-raise as much as possible. But if you're playing no limit hold'em, it's a little more tricky. You only got one pair. Sure, it's top pair, but if somebody else has a set, you could lose everything you have. So in no limit, you want to be more cautious and look to trap. In limit hold'em, when you get to the river, it's totally okay to stay aggressive. If you think you have the best hand, go ahead and bet one more time. What's the worst thing that can happen? You lose one more bet. Big deal. It's not the end of the world. But in no limit hold'em, it just might be. In no limit hold'em, even if you think you have the best hand sometimes, if a really scary card comes off and it might cost you your entire stack, sometimes it's better to just check and win what's already in the middle. Limit hold'em has often been described as a science, while no limit hold'em is often considered an art form. See, the problem with bluffing in limit hold'em is you just can't put enough pressure on your opponents with one stinking bet. However, in no limit hold'em, if you think your opponent's weak, you can bet it all if you want. Now that ought to scare them. In a live game, all you have to worry about is playing your hands right and maximizing your profit. But in a tournament, you often have to sacrifice value in order to survive. Tournament poker is more about survival and money management skills than it is getting full value on your hands. There are mixed theories on how to approach the early stages of a tournament. The best approach, though, is to take calculated risks and really go after those dead money players. There's more bad players in the early stages of the tournament, and if you don't get that dead money, one of the other top players will. The middle stages of a tournament are really tough. Your strategy depends on your table composition. If you're at a table with a bunch of weak and timid players, well then you be a maniac and start attacking them. However, if there's already a bunch of maniacs at your table, well then you need to be patient, sit back, and look to trap them. It's all about ebb and flow. Okay, now this is the stage that separates the men from the boys. What you want to do now is get super aggressive, especially against the wimpy players who aren't looking to play and just squeak into the money. The real champions at this stage live by a philosophy. It's real simple. In order to survive, you must be willing to die. See you at the tables.